This is a subject we've touched on slightly with our interview this morning with Dominic. Picture this. You've got a great idea for a product, and you've started your business, and maybe you've worked with a co-founder to do it. Your company starts to grow, and it's time to start taking on new hires so you can share some of the workload. Suddenly, you're not only a founder, but you're a leader, a manager, a recruitment agent, head of HR, you're everything. How do you navigate that leadership journey so that you can build a happy and productive team? Well, we'll ask Amy, and welcome Amy to the stage, who's going to tell us all how to do it. Welcome, Amy.
I always get very nervous in the lead up to public speaking, and last week I had a dream that I got up here, halfway through I froze and then ran off the stage crying. So if at any point that happens, it's going to be way more awkward for me than any of you. And that's why I have my notes printed here. So anyway, thank you for the introduction, Nikki. I'm very excited to be here. My name's Amy. I'm here to tell you a little bit about leadership, or if you are working in startups, how to deal with change, because that is pretty much all you're really experiencing. I am a leadership coach and facilitator, and I work mostly with startups and scale-ups, helping founders and leadership teams understand what it means for them to be great leaders for their businesses to grow. And I fell in love with that work and the coaching skills that underpin it when I worked at Slack, which is what I did for 8 years before moving into coaching full-time. I first started in the customer experience team, and then I moved to the developer support team before moving into doing app reviews and the work I did for most of the time at Slack, which was building and leading the app directory team. And I would never have guessed when I applied to join Slack that that would have been the work I would end up doing, which is why I would love to share with you today some of what I learned on my journey there. Even if your startup isn't yet the size of Slack, there's one thing I can almost guarantee that you'll be experiencing, and that's a lot of change. At a macro level, Slack's own story is one of change and pivot. In the early 2000s, Stuart Butterfield, Cal Henderson, and Eric Costello were part of the founding team for a game called Game Neverending. And when it found that they weren't succeeding with that, they decided that they needed to pivot. They moved the team to building something based on the tool that they'd built for the game, which was the ability to share photos. That product became Flickr, which was then sold and acquired by Yahoo. Now, in 2011, Stuart, Cal, and Eric, again with a group of other people, decided they were going to have another go at building a game. And so they started Glitch in 2011. That product was a fun, colorful MMORPG. They had high hopes, and it didn't go as well as they were hoping. So once again, they had to figure out, how do we pivot? And they'd built a tool to allow them to communicate with distributed team members, to share files, to keep everything in one place. And that was the bones of Slack, which meant that then in 2014, they launched what became Slack. And so from trying to create two games came two completely different companies, one of which was an enterprise company that sold in the largest tech acquisition in history at the time. In fact, when Glitch shut, you can still see the heart and soul of Glitch in Slack to this day. This is the Slack 404 page, so you can see the reference to the glitch. Also, you can see the chicken and the pig in the bottom there, which are the animals you'd have interacted with in the game Glitch. And if any of you have ever seen the dusty stick emoji in Slack and wondered what that is, that was from Glitch. So the change happened on a macro level at the company, but within the company as well, there was huge and massive change for all of us involved. When I joined the company, there were fewer than 50 people. I was the only person working from Europe, and I joined a team of 6 people in the customer experience team. 3 months later, the company had doubled, the team size had doubled, and that happened again the next 3 months. And obviously, we didn't double every 3 months, but at one point, I think it hit 6. But by the time I left last year, the company had grown to just under 3,000 people and had been acquired and joined Salesforce's 70,000 people. And I knew going into working at Slack that there'd be a huge amount of change, and that's why I wanted to work there. That and they they would reply to people's questions on Twitter with Star Trek The Next Generation memes, and I thought, yes, that is the place that I want to work. But it's one thing to think that and another thing to experience it. And from the day I joined, my job felt different every 3 months. Even in the early days of being on the customer experience team, the product was changing so quickly that it felt like supporting an entirely new product every 3 months. And when we built processes, they would break. We could build them and they'd last maybe 3 months, but by that point, there'd be so many new people, so many changes, that we just had to iterate or scrap because they'd break them down and start again. In the early days, keeping your job was essentially getting promoted, because if you were there 6 months, you were doing an entirely different scope of work. And so after moving to work on app reviews in 2015, when we launched our app directory and platform, it was clear that that work was going to grow and we needed someone to manage it, and that's the work I started doing. I was asked to do it, and suddenly, after saying yes, I was a manager with no previous experience of management or leadership, and I had 2 reports who had been my peers in the developer support team, who'd been helping me with the reviews, and it was a really steep learning curve. I did a lot of reading, which is what I tend to do when I've got something new, and I read a lot of studies that said that one of the main reasons people leave their job is their manager. So I had goal number 1, don't be so bad a manager that people run away from the company. And so throughout my growth and my experience of learning to be a leader, I just felt constantly on the edge of my comfort zone. I'd have moments when these projects would come along and they would just feel huge and overwhelming, and there was just no way I would be able to wrap my head around them. And then 2 weeks later, another project would come along that was twice as large and overwhelming and complicated, so much so that it made the first one feel like a nice little side project when trying to figure out that second project. So I say all this to emphasize that, as many of you will know, succeeding in a startup is fundamentally getting good at navigating change. And for leaders, whether you will have people who report to you or not, it means understanding how you react to change and being able to lead others through it. And so, if change is a given, how do you manage it? Good leadership is about helping others navigate that change and taking them through it with you. But great leadership is about evolving yourself as a leader throughout. Again, when I first became a manager, there was a never-ending list of things that I needed to get good at: giving feedback, having one-on-ones, hiring, career conversations, communicating clearly, building strategic relationships. I mean, the list just kept going on. And they were things I knew that I needed to learn and get good at. And we expect our teams to continually evolve our skills, staying on top of the tech stack you're using or marketing trends. But I've noticed that when it comes to our leadership skills, we often fall into a little bit of a trap. We understand what skills we need to build, we build them, and we get to good leader status. And then we sort of end up stopping there. But really, we need to start thinking about our leadership skills as in constant evolution, because that's where we really start succeeding. And if I look back on my experience of leadership and learning how to manage people, there were a few milestone points that helped me make sense of all that. The first was that when I was hiring 2 new team members for the team after we'd been a small team of 4 for a while, and I compared the experience of onboarding these new team members compared to the previous experience. And the confidence that I'd built over time felt really good. I felt like I'd nailed the basics of the job, and I was no longer quite as nervous bringing these new people on board. But I noticed that while I could show up and do these things with more confidence with the new team members, I was still very much showing up from a position of new manager with the older team. I was still operating from that perspective where things were maybe just a little bit more awkward. The difficult conversations just felt a little more difficult. I was a little more reluctant to ask for feedback and to test out new things. And so I found myself in a situation where simultaneously I'd gained confidence in myself and my skills with new team members, but somehow wasn't applying that to the people who were already in my team. Another milestone was when I led the help center team when my colleague was on maternity leave, and overnight, I doubled my reports, had to learn a whole new set of systems, new team dynamics, and all while keeping my own team running well. And it felt like trying to evolve myself as a leader overnight, making sure that two teams felt supported, making sure that I was in the place where I was needed when I was needed. And many of the skills that I was using in this were the same basic skills I'd learned when I first became a leader. Clear communication, supporting people, making sure that I'm delegating and giving feedback. But it required a significantly higher level of mastery and iteration than I'd ever had before. And I felt simultaneously better about my experiences and my skills than ever before, while again feeling like a brand new manager all over again. And so I realized more than anything, it meant starting to take a good look at myself, my own reactions, what was getting in my way, because like in the previous example, I was the thing that was standing in my own way of making growth and changing. And so I'd like you to invite an image of a hermit crab. This feels very appropriate that we're down by the seaside. But this is one of the best sort of images I can think of for what it feels like to be a leader in a fast-growing startup. Hermit crabs are born with very little, they don't have shell, it's a soft exoskeleton, and so they'll try and find shells from other creatures around. They'll outgrow their shell, they'll look for the next one, move up in size. Which is very much how it can feel to be a leader in an organization. You grow your skills, and maybe you start feeling a little bit more comfortable, and you realize, okay, I think I might have this. And then immediately a big problem comes along that you hadn't foreseen, and you suddenly need to find yourself at that next level of skill, that next shell. And in the moments between where you don't yet have your next shell, you're exposed, you're vulnerable, you don't know what you're doing once again, and it feels very scary. And so all of us are just hermit crabs trying to find our next shell. The other thing I learned was that the manager that I was in year one was nothing like the leader I was when I left, and my team would tell you there was improvement to be made there as well, of course. But this is where it's one of the biggest challenges of leading in an organization that grows this fast, is that your organization will consistently and constantly be different, even if it's going from 2 to 4 or from 200 to 400. And that means that your leadership skills will need to be different and better for that. So how do we do that? How do you grow as a leader when it's not just in those moments of forced change? How do you do it regularly? Similar to what Dom was saying earlier, it's about self-reflection. Everyone's going to be going through a roller coaster of emotions throughout the experience, and often we're reacting to other people's emotional reactions to situations more than we're reacting to the situations themselves. So if we can start seeing how we react to stress as leaders, being able to see our blind spots, we get much better at being able to call those things out for other people. It means that we can start seeing that we're avoiding difficult conversations because they're going to feel uncomfortable, but really we're choosing the discomfort of the status quo, which will last us much longer, over a shorter-term discomfort of actually having to have that conversation. It'll also make us easier to receive feedback, because if, rather than it feeling like it's direct pointed at us, it's more data to collect for our self-reflection. In the early days, we were talking about delegation earlier, I had work that I had to hand off to the members on my team. And I would keep hold of it because it made me anxious, and I didn't want to give it to my team because I thought, I don't want to make you feel anxious. I don't want to be the reason you feel anxious. That made no sense for many reasons, other than the fact that they would do it much better and more quickly than me, but also they weren't anxious about this work. That was all my overthinking. I thought I'd reflected on how I could be a good leader, a good manager, keep work off their desks, and really I was overthinking and projecting. And it turns out I'm not as good at reading minds as I thought I was. And so I learned it's really easy to fall into that overthinking and think that it's reflection. The feeling of reflection is sitting down, taking a breath, and having the opportunity to learn something, whether that's building more confidence in the solution that you've put forward for yourself and feeling really good about it, or learning something that means you can change along the way. Whereas overthinking, we lose that sense of learning, and we get stuck in more of a spiral and that tunnel vision. So if we ask ourselves open-ended questions, ask ourselves what we're learning and where we might be wrong, that's where we really start stretching our skills and learning how we can lead better. And if you're ever wondering if there's a particular prompt for a time that's a good point for reflection, and I've experienced this a lot and heard this a lot, it's that moment that we find ourselves saying, it would all be okay if only the team listened to me, or if only so-and-so actually listened to the prioritization, or if only people were as motivated and dedicated as caring as I am. In those moments where we start feeling like everyone in the team is against us, or where we aren't quite being listened to, those are the moments for us as leaders to go inwards and understand, what context do we have that the team is missing? What are we not communicating clearly? It's unlikely that the whole team is underperforming. And while underperformance does happen, in those moments where things aren't progressing as we're expecting, that's where we can look at what we're getting in, how we're getting in our own way and our team's way. And so that self-reflection, looking at asking ourselves questions about what we're doing well, what we could be doing better, where we're wrong, how we're feeling about things, and what's getting in our own way. And that's crucial to us to build the resilience and the muscle that we need to really help people grow within our teams, especially when things change so quickly. And I will say, it is important to look at how far you've grown. It's really easy to get stuck on that treadmill of constant improvement. And that can be dangerous if it's not accompanied by a sense of the progress you've made. It's particularly difficult for founders who forget the strategic importance of seeing progress. If we place too much emphasis on being perfect, we don't see how far we've come, and that can be incredibly dangerous and just lead to more stress. Whereas constant improvement allows us to reflect, learn about ourselves, constantly grow, and most importantly, allow for failure, because there's a lot of that along the way in a startup. And it also allows the ability to celebrate progress for progress' sake, which is really important for the humans that you're working with and yourselves as leaders and founders, because it can be a grueling environment. My story here is that I started going to the gym last year, and it's really helped me build my confidence when it comes to seeing my progress. I always leave feeling very achy and feeling like I'm not making any progress. But then I realize I'm doing more reps or more sets with heavier weights. And I look back to the first ever workout I did, and I'm lifting double the weight. And so this is where it's important to look back on that progress. I felt bad at my job a lot of the time at Slack because it was one thing I couldn't do after another thing I couldn't do. And I think if I'd looked back and seen those challenges as the heavier weights I was lifting in my progress, I think I'd have been able to see that and feel a little bit calmer and prouder of it in the moment. And it's crucial to say that all of this feels hard because it is hard. It is not, you might feel like you don't know what you're doing, and that's probably because you don't know what you're doing yet. In fact, very few people know what they're doing. We're all making it up and just picking up heavier and heavier weights as we go. So it's important to look back at those weights once in a while. And so I'm coming up to the end of my time, and I thought to summarize some of what I've covered, I would put it as advice to my past self. And I think I would say to myself, again, it's difficult. And all of it feels difficult because it is difficult. It's not because you're inherently bad at it. You should remember how far you've come, and you shouldn't let the push of you can always improve prevent you from seeing how far you have come already. You will feel bad at things a lot. And that's because you're always doing new things. You're always pushing your boundaries, and you'll get good at them eventually. The fourth is reflect and write things down. Remember to have a really regular reflection practice and to write those things down. It's incredibly easy to forget the progress you're making, so those snapshots can be crucial and very valuable when you look back. Great leaders keep evolving. Your leadership skills are not one and done. You'll be a great leader if you intentionally grow and adapt. And then it helps to get perspective. Time works differently in a startup. 3 months can feel like 3 years. So it's important to keep that in context. And so in the last 30 seconds, I would like to leave you with an invitation. If you don't already have a regular reflection practice, adding even just a what do I do well, what could I do better, what did I learn, and what do I want to try differently next week at the end of every week will make such a difference in the long run. It will compound over time. You'll see your own growth. You'll learn so much. And it really is an invaluable practice that I would invite you all to try. That's it. That's me. 5 seconds left. OK, I did it. Thank you all for listening. I will be around later if anyone has any questions, but feel free to reach out. Thank you.